Are you taking AP English Literature? If so, you probably are afraid of poetry. I am. Heather Garcia is. We're here to help you guys. I'm John from Marco Learning. This is Heather Garcia. She is a master AP teacher and has been a reader and knows everything about this exam. Heather, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well, and yourself?
I'm good enough, I guess, is what I'm going to say. No, I'm here. I love that we're talking about this topic tonight because I think you and I have been working at this for more than 15 years with our kids. And that moment when you stare at a poem on the multiple choice of AP English Lit and your heart sinks, that moment when you see Q1 and it's from the author to her book and you're like, what are you talking about? And it's old fashioned, or even if it's modern and obscure, it can be very overwhelming. You don't need to be worried about poetry. Heather, let's get right into it. I want to show everyone one thing real quick that has helped me and that we've designed here at Marco Learning for all of you, which is we have a whole series of videos on the multiple choice section. We actually did our previous AP exam hack that you led us through on the multiple choice. We have examples of poems. I have a poetry rubric video where I walk you through each of the elements of the rubric for AP English Lit. We have a 5-part series on the poetry question for free response, a 5-part series on the prose fiction analysis essay, Q2. We have our other AP Lit exam hacks that we did. This recording is here for you as well. And a 5-part series on the literary argument essay and our one on the sophistication point and all of this. So there's tons of information here, including poems, 36 videos. Definitely check out this playlist on our channel at Marco Learning. It's there for you. And I'm going to add this video to that playlist. Heather, I'm going to turn it over to you to help us. You have 21 and a half minutes to help us read all the poems of the world. Go.
Deal, no pressure. All right. Hi, everybody. I am going to get this into presentation mode. All right. So welcome to AP Lit Poetry Tips. We are going to kind of focus on 3 main components for this. So you need to know where the poems live on the exam and kind of the breakdown of the exam. And I'm hoping at this point that it's review, but if not, that's okay. We're just going to kind of circle the wagon and make sure that you are fully taken care of in all aspects of this exam. You need to know when you get a poem that you've never seen before, what to look for, and kind of know where to look within the poem, because there are a few shortcuts that can make this way less intimidating. So the first thing you need to know is that they are not scary. Poems seem scary when you first dive into them. They can be intimidating. The language can get a little dicey, but the multiple choice questions themselves will oftentimes help you get a little bit of understanding about the poem itself. And the questions in the multiple choice are going to go chronologically through the poem. That's the way they've always done it in the past. Is the first question is going to ask you about the beginning of the poem. The middle questions will ask you about the middle of the poem. The questions at the end are going to ask you about the poem as a whole. So if you're completely lost at the beginning of the poem and you're panicking, and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's happening, look at the question. It'll help you. When you get to the poetry essay question, you look at the prompt, read the prompt. A College Board gives you those first couple lines with the stable wording to give you a framework to kind of hang your understanding on when you approach that poem. So if you go into poetry expecting to be scared, and if you psych yourself up that you are not good at poetry, and you have that negative self-talk, well, guess what? You're kind of going to be bad at the poetry because you're going to psych yourself out. You've got to get past that negative self-talk. You can teach yourself how to read poetry, but in order to do that, you kind of have to read poetry. So one of the suggestions I have is that you kind of nerd it out a little bit. Get onto some websites, look at some modern poetry, start there. Go on to poets.org and sign up for their daily emails. Get yourself some daily poetry coming up in your email thread. Follow poets on social media, whichever social media you have. There's tons of them out there. Use hashtag famous poets or classic poetry or modern poetry, and you'll find all sorts of things. The more you read, the better you're going to feel and the more confident you're going to be in your abilities. So get past the idea that they're scary. And even though I know that last slide was full of hearts, I promise that not all the poems are about love. And this is a common misconception for people who don't like poetry. Oh, I don't want to read about love. I'm promising you they're not all about love. So I made a list of some of my favorite themes that I like to tackle when I read poetry, and I get so excited when I find them. So poetry can be about overcoming our fears about who we are and where we're going in life and where we're going in the afterlife. They can be about accepting ourselves and accepting our fate in the world and the fate that maybe we are given and the fate that we missed out on, right? It's about loss of innocence, that like loss of childhood. It's about value and the importance of friendship or what happens when you're missing that. There can be about revenge. They can be about the role of fate and destiny in our lives and how powerless we are or how we fight against those things. It can be about bravery in the face of insurmountable challenges. There is some amazing poetry that is coming out of some social movements that, I mean, take my breath away. Poetry can be about the choices that we make and don't make, right? Because sometimes the choice that we're too afraid to make is just as important as the choice we make. The value and purpose of life, emptiness and loneliness, like all of these themes and more, many more, can be explored in poetry. So knowing that you can get some really, really rich content out of poems, and you're not just going to read about like John Donne and his wife and how many kids they have and how she's sad because he has to leave on a ship. Like, cool, whatever. There's so much more. So broaden your horizons, read some poems so you can get over that fear. But don't start with Shakespeare. Seriously, like start with a better one. Start with somebody a little bit more modern. I swear, it'll make it easier. One of the ways to get past the scary is to get novels in verse. Young adult novels right now are all over the place with novels in verse. You can just go on your local bookstore. I need a novel in verse. They will get them for you. These books help kind of break that barrier. Any of the titles, doesn't even matter which. They're all good. I can't say they're all good, but a lot of them are really, really good. Okay, let's talk about the broader context of the exam now that we've kind of gotten the fear of poetry out of there. So the broader context, the exam format itself, you're going to find poems in that multiple choice section. You're also going to find poems in the free response section. The entire first question is focused on poetry. You'll have 40 minutes where you get a poem that you've never seen before, most likely, because I swear they search in like the most obscure places for these poems, things I've never even heard of, but by authors who are sometimes familiar. And then you'll have your prompt and you write for 40 minutes on that. For the multiple choice section, in the past, there's usually about 5 passages that you're going to be seeing in total in that multiple choice section with about 8 to 10, sometimes 12 questions each. 2 of those are most likely going to be poetry. So that means that you're going to tackle about 3-ish poems on your exam. Now, obviously, some years are different. Some are more poem heavy, some aren't. Sometimes for prose, they'll pull in an excerpt from a Shakespeare play, and by golly, it reads just like poetry. So that's not nice, but it happens. So just something to consider, right? So you got about 3-ish poems that you're going to be dealing with in the exam. So what are some things to look for? You get a poem, you've never seen it before. Let's take away the time setting of the test, right? Let's focus on practice, because you are not going to be able to watch this YouTube video and just dive into the test and be like, I'm a rock star. I mean, we would love that, but you have to practice. So let's assume that in this moment, you're going to get a book of poetry from the library. You're going to sign up for some daily emails. You're going to ask your teacher for some poems. You're going to look in your textbook all by yourself, even if your teacher doesn't assign it, and you're going to look at some poems, okay? This is what you're going to do. When you read through it, you're going to focus on what is the tone of this. That's the easiest place to start. Look at the word choice that the author is using. Is it dark? Is it dismal? Is it bright? Is it light? Is it airy? What is the tone that's going to help you lean towards meaning? Are there any big metaphors, right? Okay, so I'm reading a poem about a bagel. It's rolling down a hill. It's a legit poem that I've taught in my class. So there's a bagel rolling down a hill. Okay, is this really a poem about a bagel rolling down a hill? Or is it really about life and how it kind of gets away from us And we just spend our whole time like chasing the thing that we think we want when really the thing we need is actually kind of behind us, right? Are there any bigger metaphors that's happening in this poem? I have the arrow pointing there because these big metaphors are sometimes where kids get lost, and they think that that's what makes poems scary, is that they're like, I thought the poem was about a bagel. I answered the questions like it was a bagel. Just think beyond the bagel, right? Focus on the bigger metaphor. Once you've kind of looked for metaphors, not every poem has one, but it's AP. Chances are they're going to pull at least one. So what's the theme? What is the problem? What's the solution? What's the author's take on it, right? Like, what am I supposed to glean from this poem? Who's speaking and to whom, right? Because the biggest mistake you can make is assume that the author of the poem is the speaker of the poem, because that is not always the case. Sometimes, but not always. And so you just can't assume that. So who is doing the speaking and who are they speaking to? How is the author achieving his or her tone? So you've established what the tone is at the beginning. You've kind of checked out any metaphors. You've kind of navigated the theme a little bit. Okay, so now how is that tone happening? Is it word choice? Is it sing-songy with its rhythm? Is there some really awesome figurative language happening? Are there big shifts, juxtapositions? Like, what is it? So that leads us to this next part. So are there big shifts? In literature, things are only as interesting as they are when they're shaken up, right? If everything is going status quo and everything's going good and everyone's singing and dancing and lovely and great, well, there's no story. Same with poems. You can't maintain, I mean, you could, but it's really hard to maintain one tone throughout the entire piece unless it's a really short poem. So look for those shifts. Look for where the tone changes, even if it's subtle. Look for where who the speaker is talking to changes, because that happens sometimes too. The audience will shift. Sometimes they're talking about someone and then they shift it and then they're talking to someone. Like, that's a big deal. So look for those moments. Can you spot any juxtaposition? Juxtaposition is where you have two opposing things kind of near one another. And whenever that happens, it's for a purpose. If you have bright light shining into a dark room, well, guess what? It's probably there to highlight what that bright light is. Think of a stage. The spotlight is there to highlight the person who's in the middle of that spotlight, and everything else kind of fades to dark. That's juxtaposition, drawing your eye where they want it to go. It happens in poetry too. Look for those opposites. And then, is there any meaningful figurative language? Like, okay, cool, you found a simile, good job. Does it mean anything? Does it deepen the poem in any way? Does that comparison make you find value in this poem? If not, probably not that important. It's probably just a simile, move on, right? My biggest piece of advice when you're reading poetry, when you're reading anything, it only matters if it matters. So if I'm telling you that, like, you need to focus on setting, okay, well, the setting isn't doing anything. Okay, is that important? Maybe not. It only matters if it matters. If I'm telling you this poem has a big metaphor, find it and tell me what its purpose is. Okay, you know something's happening. But when you dive into these poems on the AP test, no one's telling you to look for setting. No one's telling you, hey, the metaphor is a big deal here. You have to look at the simile and be like, is the simile doing anything? Or, okay, I noticed there's a rhyme scheme, A, B, A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D. But does it matter? If it changes the meaning of the poem, sure, it matters. If it doesn't, all right. There is a poem, and the title eludes me right now, but it followed an A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D rhyme scheme, right? At the very last words, right? It was like they rhymed back and forth. Well, the last line where she broke up with her lover had an entire no rhyme scheme, didn't match anything that had happened before that. And it mattered because, right, she was breaking that rhyme scheme. She was breaking that relationship. Okay, meaning made, fantastic. Otherwise, rhyme scheme may not matter, okay? I'm telling you this because one of the things I see as a grader is the kids will find something in a poem, a simile, hyperbole, personification, onomatopoeia, and they get locked there. They found a device like an Easter egg and they're keeping it in their basket and they refuse to get rid of it. And they focus a whole essay around it. but it's not super significant. It's not doing much. That's what you want to avoid, right? You want to focus on the things that mean a little bit more. Okay, that's my message. So as you approach poems, right? So this whole slide is really for you practicing. But on test day, you're not going to have time to linger over these poems. It is not going to be a leisurely stroll through the language. It's going to be a sprint, and you are going to be racing past these lines of poetry and hoping you get something. This is where TPCASTT comes in, because it is an acronym that you can remember that's going to help you kind of grasp onto things as you're reading, things to look out for, things that you could potentially write about in a poetry essay. So looking at the title and paraphrasing, that should happen in, right? You're not annotating this. You're just thinking about these things. That's why they're up there in the blue. Your title, is it significant? Don't ignore them. They're important most of the time. And then paraphrasing, that should happen in your head as you're reading. And that should not make its way into your essay, because the paraphrasing is just so that you can get a grasp of what's happening. Whether you're reading it for multiple choice or you're reading it for the essay, you have to have a grasp of what this poem is about. So just kind of paraphrase the lines as you go. Now, connotation, attitude and tone, shifts, title, and theme. Those are things you can write about, right? So you're diving into the essay and you're looking at the author's specific word choice that really drives meaning, the connotation behind the words. So you have denotation and connotation. Denotation is the dictionary definition of a word. The connotation is all the emotions that come with it, right? So think of a dove. It's a white bird. Cool. Okay. Denotation. Connotation. Peace and serenity and hope and like the fig leaf and the rainbow and all that stuff tied into the dove. There's a reason that in movies that they have really expensive weddings, they release the doves into the world, right? They're trying to set the tone. The connotation is that this wedding is going to be blissful and peaceful and love and all of that. Okay. So connotation is something that you could really write about, and you can pull apart words that make a difference. So Anne Plato's poem Remembrance, she pulls in the words, and I'm trying to remember them, so I'm going to quote them wrong, but it had to do with her friend who had died had a white halo of hair. A halo of hair. That tells us so much about the relationship between Anne Plato and the person who died, right? She values her, she respects her, she looks up to her. She is somebody who she is like glorifying, right? She's not looking down at her white hair. It is a halo. And just that one word, man, you can talk a lot about the relationship of those two characters within the poem based on that. So attitude and tone. Connotation will usually lead you to attitude and tone, right? They're going to connect. And so connotation is a path to get you there. You could also use connotation to describe, right, to like lead you to metaphor too, right? Because metaphors are obviously something you could write about if it exists. The shifts, like I had mentioned, those big shifts, if they exist within the poem, chances are there's a reason. Poetry is a tight little format. You don't have a ton of wiggle when you are writing a nice tight poem. And the College Board is usually going to pick a poem that's less than, I want to say 300-ish words, right? Like they try to keep them kind of short. So that's not a lot of words to work with. And then the title. I have the title, the TPCASTT structure has the title on here twice. So you think about the title as you're reading, but when you cycle back, when it's time to start writing, look at that title again. Is it significant? There was a prompt that College Board had released, and it was juggler, right? The juggler. And I always say the prompt as the juggler, but it's not, it's just juggler. And the missing the is actually something that you could write about. So when you're looking at this prompt, it's all about man and them trying, like humanity and us trying to kind of control the world around us. And if it was the juggler, right, that title, if the was there, then it would be this one piece of humanity, this one example of humanity, the juggler, the man who is trying to navigate his life. But the isn't there, it's just juggler. So since it is no longer the juggler, a single juggler, it is now humanity's juggler. It is now all of us. Like, this poem has just extended to all of humanity because of the missing the. Like, that's when a title comes into play, right? It may not always matter, but when it matters, it matters. And then the theme, right? If you can connect a metaphor to the theme, or the shift to the theme, or if you can find that underlying purpose behind the poem, you're golden. These are things to shape an essay around. These are things to think about as you're navigating multiple choice, because my goodness, those multiple choice questions can get a little wild sometimes. If you're taking this in paper and pencil and you can preview the multiple choice questions as you go, please do so, because sometimes the multiple choice questions will give you some understanding about the poem as a whole, especially if you jump to the questions at the end of that passage. Remember, those questions are going to give you an overview of the poem as a whole. So if you can kind of jump to those end questions and see kind of what the big picture is for that poem, it might help you kind of guide through the poem. Okay. When you're practicing, practice annotating for TPCASTT. It'll only get faster. You'll only get better, so that when you approach test day, you are no longer scared and you are confident and you know what you're looking for. You know what the acronym stands for. I did not make this acronym, by the way. This is just a common English acronym at this point. I think it's just everywhere. I've seen it all over the place. So you can, if you need, there's all sorts of handouts you can find online. There's stuff. So let's look at quickly, right? We're not going to spend a lot of time lingering here. Let's just quickly look at this poem and how you could apply TPCASTT to it. So when you are approaching the multiple choice questions, you have about a minute per question and a minute to read the passage. That's it. So if you are taking a minute per question, which people don't always, they sometimes take about 30 seconds, you are leaving yourself at best 3 minutes to read the poem. That's it. So the more practice you give yourself, the better off you'll be. This one is called My Song. And looking at the title, this is my singular song, mine, human, right? Not sharing it. Paraphrasing it as we went, this one is broken up into stanzas for us. Goodness, children, if you write the word paragraphs in your essay about poems, that's bad. Don't do that. You have stanzas, not paragraphs. Drives me crazy when I see that in essays. It's not enough to fail you on the essay, but it is enough for me to know that you panicked on test day. Stanzas, not paragraphs. So it's broken up into stanzas, which makes it easy to paraphrase. So I sang me a song, a tiny song, a song that was sweet to my soul, and set it afloat on the happy sea of chance in search of a happy goal. Let's stop there, right? Look at this connotation. This is cheerful. This is sing-songy. It's rhymey. We have a song set afloat on the sea of chance in search of a happy goal. I said to my song, go on, and lodge in a tender spot of some human soul where the fires of hate and selfishness are not. My song went on but a little space and hied it back to me, and fell at my feet in a sorry plight, the victim of cruelty. Notice that shift? Things are happy, it's going, we're hopeful. Bam, it only went on a little space and it hied back to me, it came right back. So now that victim of cruelty, look at that dash, and it fell at my feet in a sorry plight, end dash. That dash right there, that is signifying the victim of cruelty. It heightens that line right there for us. This is a tone shift, okay? The connotation is moving. We went from a happy little sea to a sorry plight. That happened quickly. I gazed a moment and quickly saw just how it had come about. A cruel critic had caught my song and probed the soul of it out. Oh, poor indeed is the human mind, and why was it ever wrought, that can thrive on husk in the form of words and not a sturdy thought? Right? He's mourning this harsh criticism of his song. And guess what songs are? Poetry, right? Chances are Mr. Joseph Seaman Cotter Sr. in 1895 had a poem that wasn't responded to well. Okay, we've got shifts, we've got attitude and tone shifting, we have connotation happening. The title of my song, now it's taking on a little bit more ownership, right? He's kind of mourning the trajectory of this song that he had taken ownership of and loved. And then the theme here, we're really dealing with rejection and how horrible it feels to have somebody kind of squash on our dreams, right? All of that in less than 3 minutes, because that's how quick you've got to dive through a poem. You don't have time to linger. You move, you operate quickly. All right. There is a trick for sonnets, right? So this poem is not a sonnet, right? It's just a poem that we had to tackle with TPCASTT. Sometimes you're going to get sonnets. Sonnets are 14 lines long. That's just the rule. They're 14 lines long. And two of the most popular forms, not the only forms, there's four, but two of the most popular are Elizabethan and Petrarchan. Elizabethan, think Shakespeare. Petrarchan, Italian, think Petrarch. So you're looking for the shift, and if you want the fancy term, it's a volta. But you're looking for the shift here because when you're dealing with sonnets, there's a predictable structure. You know what to look for. When you look at a poem and it kind of looks like a square or a rectangle, count the lines. If there are 14 of them, by golly, you're most likely dealing with a sonnet. Fantastic. Then look at the punctuation. Sometimes we get lucky and they will put the punctuation exactly where we need it to know where to find the shift. Doesn't always happen, but sometimes it does. Let's focus on Elizabethan first. The volta, that shift, is going to happen right at the beginning of line 13. So lines 1 through 12 are going to establish some sort of concept. And then the shift is going to happen in line 13, 14, where the author is going to tell us how they feel about what happened in lines 1 through 12, or they're going to subvert the meaning, or they're going to shake us up a little bit. Like, we can expect that shift to happen there. So lines 1 through 4 are going to be kind of a solid thought. Sometimes they'll end with a period at the end of line 4, sometimes a semicolon. Lines 5 through 8 will be a kind of a cohesive thought. Lines 9 through 12 will be its own little cohesive unit. If we're lucky, there'll be a period at the end of line 4, line 8, and line 12. If not, it might be a comma, might be a semicolon, maybe a dash, right? But there should be something there. And then line 13 and 14 will stand on their own. Shift over to Petrarchan. So here, the volta is going to happen right in between lines 8 and 9, that volta, okay? Lines 1 through 8 are going to establish an idea, establish a concept, establish an image, and then the final 6 lines are where that shift happens, where they tell us what they thought of those first 8 lines, or the tone is going to change, or the events are going to change, right? So the shift happens at different places. If you don't remember this on test day, or you don't get a sonnet, it's not a big deal. You're fine. If you happen to notice a sonnet, if you happen to be struggling through a poem, and you're like, okay, how many lines? 14 lines, 14 lines, shift. It might just give you that boost that you need to get you going. And if you're writing an essay, by golly, it might give you something to talk about, because you're like, okay, I was told to look for the shift. I found the shift. What's it telling me? You can at least get a solid body paragraph out of most shifts, right? Let's look at some samples. Oh, so why are we looking for the shift? Okay, because sonnets are predictable. Sonnets are often tested, right? I think sonnets are one of the more popular poetry forms tested on the AP Lit exam. And looking for the shift before you even begin really saves you time, right? Because this test is as much a test of your knowledge as it is your endurance and your pacing. If you spend too much time, let's say they open up with a poem, questions 1 through 12, and you linger there for 30 minutes, you messed up, right? You've got to pace yourself. That's going to come with practice. But looking for shifts, if you notice a sonnet, will save you time. Okay, so here is a sample from William Shakespeare. Love it, love it. This is one of my favorites. So sonnet 130. My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, well, then her breasts are done. If hair be wires, black wires grow on her head. Look at that helpful period. 1, 2, 3, 4 lines in. Thank you, Will. I've seen roses damasked, red and white, but no such rose I see in her cheek. And in some perfumes is there more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. Thank you for the period again, but now, okay, I don't know about you, but I really am digging a poem where his lady love's breath is super smelly, right? That is a pretty fantastic poem. Next 4 lines. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. He has spent this entire first 12 lines kind of bad mouthing his mistress a little bit, but he's doing it in a way that is making fun of Petrarchan sonnets, because Petrarchan sonnets are famous for putting women on this pedestal that is just unattainable. And Shakespeare is making fun of it. So now let's look at his last 2 lines. We know there's going to be a shift. So look at that. And yet, as if the punctuation wasn't enough, he even gives us a transition statement. So, and yet, by heaven, I think my love is rare as any she belied with false compare. Thank you, thank you, thank you, because in this moment with these 2 lines, he establishes that his love is not rare. She's not some pedestal beauty. Her eyes are nothing like the sun. They're probably brown. No, her lips aren't red. No, coral is red. My lady's lips are flesh colored, right? That's a thing. If hairs are wires, well, black wires grow out of her head. She's not this blonde goddess, right? He's realistic about his love. And yet, he thinks his love is as rare as any she belied beyond false compare. Like, she is real. I don't need a false comparison. I got the real deal here, brother. That is this poem. But knowing that that shift is coming can save kids, because what happens is they read this and they're like, oh my gosh, Shakespeare's the worst. He's so mean. Look at how he talks about her. They always get stuck on the breath with the mistress reeks. Like, that line always gets them. And I have to remind them, like, wait for the shift. The shift matters in this poem. If you were to cut off at line 12, you would think Will was the worst, right? But we know he's not. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next poem, right? That shift is important. Sonnet 130 is the best. Let's move on. Petrarchan sample. So here we go. Sonnet 15. Where the green leaves exclude this. Oh, my picture's over it. There we go. Where the green leaves, oh my goodness, exclude the summer beam and soft bend as balmy breezes blow, and where with liquid laps the lucid stream across the fretted rock is heard to flow. Pensive I lay, when she whom earth can cease, as if still living to my eyes appear, and pitying heaven her angel form reveals, to say, unhappy Petrarch, dry your tears. Okay, look at that semicolon there. That's at the end of the 8th line. We don't get a period, but notice, look at the end punctuation. We have comma, comma, nothing, comma, 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 semicolon. That semicolon is a harsher pause. It's signifying the shift. And now look. Ah, exclamation mark. Thank you. That is a very nice transition. That is letting us know there's a shift. The first exclamation mark in the poem, not the last, but definitely the first one. We have others. That's not normal in poems, but that's fine. We have it. So, my sad lover, thus before your time, in grief and sadness should your life decay, and like a blighted flower, your manly prime in vain, and hopeless sorrow fade away. Ah, yield not thus to culpable despair, but raise thine eyes to heaven and think I wait thee there, right? Look at the shift. So we're starting here with the leaves and liquid laps and the lucid stream. Look at all that alliteration. We get to the bottom here and that's kind of gone. We have vain and hopeless and sorrow. Like, why are you fading away? And why like a blighted flower is your manly prime? Like, yield not to culpable despair. Like, calm down, right? That shift, the semicolon, the signifies it. All right. Poetry is going to be a little intimidating at first. I'm reminding you to practice. I'm also reminding you that on Marco Learning's website, we have free study guides. We have study guides that will help you kind of look at the multiple choice questions like I have a chart for here, because when you're looking at poetry, they're tricky. Sometimes they will pull recycled language and ideas from the poem. So you're like, oh, I remember the green leaves. Yes, that has to be the answer. No, it doesn't have to be the answer. They're trying to trick you with that recycled language. Or they'll pull something that's partly true. So they'll say, okay, in that first 8 lines, right? This was the tone. So clearly that's the tone for the whole poem, but you know that's not the case, right? Because you know that they shifted. Extreme language, too literal. So there's a study guide in this pack that's free, by the way, totally free. In there, there's also a study guide talking about connotation and diction. There's a study guide in there talking about the poetry essay. So you can go onto Marco Learning's website and go under resources, and it's under study guides. It's a free resource. Download it. It's like 38 or 40 pages. It's fantastic. My tip for you, my final, like leaving you with moment, when it comes to poetry, pacing. You've got to get your pacing down. Time yourself. Get out a practice test. Get a poem in front of you. Don't look at it yet. Set a timer. See how long it takes you to read it. See how long it takes you to answer each question. Maybe 2 minutes for the passage, 45 seconds per question, a minute at the most, but then you got to take some time for the reading. Practice yourself so that you know your pacing, because no one's going to be telling you your pacing when you're sitting there in the test, right? You're just going to be you and the clock and the paper or the computer, depending on how you're taking it. Practice is the only thing that's going to get you there. We can help and we can give you all the YouTube videos in the world, but if you're watching them all the night before the test, which you might from reminders, but you haven't practiced leading up to that, you're going to be really sad. You want to start practicing now, but watch the videos the night before, remind yourself of the shift, remind yourself of TPCASTT, but please practice in the meantime. All right. Thank you. I know that John wants to pop back on. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
That's a great idea. And thank you so much, Heather. I hope everyone that this has been helpful. We had some great comments and questions here in the chat. For those of you who've been enjoying this video, press that like button, subscribe to our channel. We have lots of great information there. And Heather, just for you, I posted those links to the free study guides page, the free practice test page. I also want to come back to my favoriteest post in the whole wide world, which was, hey, let's celebrate some teachers who've been doing some things. So real quick, I just want to shout out some of this is on the Marco Learning TikTok page. I said, do you have an awesome AP teacher? And more than 5,000 people said yes and posted those responses. So for Mr. Bierstock for Econ and Lit, Ms. Johnson for Lit, AP Lit is Mr. Canilia. We've got, let's see, Miss Rod who teaches AP Lit. Joe Luther, AP Lit, honestly, one of the best teachers I had in high school, period. He was super chill and let me write a paper on the Lorax being Marxist. That is great teaching. We've got, let's see, who else do we have? Miss Wendy Cross, who teaches AP Lit. AP Lit is Dr. Hawthorne. We've shouted out Dr. Hawthorne before, Chandler Lewis. Some teachers are lit or have literally made years, but also Ms. JB for AP Lit. Lots of great teachers out there. That's on the Marco Learning TikTok account. On the Marco Learning Instagram page, we post updates and information about the exams. The other thing I want to mention to all of you is we have a really awesome course where you can not only do practice questions, but you can actually send us your essays. It's called Student Support. The link is in the description. Heather is going to be leading our AP English Lit sessions, and expert graders will be responding. You're going to actually get to send us 6 whole essays, and we will send you the detailed feedback. And then we'll be doing intensive small group sessions to make sure all your questions are answered. So check out that information, our free study guides, our practice tests, our Instagram and TikTok accounts. Heather, any parting words of advice? I think you've left with several already. Practice, don't feel overwhelmed, but it's March 23rd, and some people are watching the recording of this the night before. You've already warned us about those people. But if it's March 23rd right now, and you're watching this live, or you're watching this in March or early April, what can you do to, I don't know, find that confidence that you're looking for? How do you help your students in the weeks leading up to the exam?
I think you need to dabble in poetry as often as you can. Ideally, I would say daily. However, if at the minimum it's weekly, right? Make yourself a nice little poetry Monday. Give yourself weekly homework. Read poems for the pure enjoyment. Read poems that inspire you. Read poems that have changed the world, and try to just get into the spirit of poetry, because that is going to eliminate a lot of the fear, and it kind of takes that academic pressure off of it, and you can just appreciate it for the language, and that'll make it, I think, just a little bit more palatable when you have to academic tackle
And
it.
remember this, everyone. Heather and I have been teaching this for almost 2 decades. And when we get to a poem, very often we don't know what's happening. We're orienting ourselves. We're taking our time. It's not, I haven't arrived yet. Have you? Like, I haven't.
Nope.
There's stuff that is overwhelming. Poetry is a strange and alternate voice for expressing the human condition. Let it stay strange and never feel overwhelmed by all of that. I think this is great advice, Heather. Thank you so much for your wisdom that you've shared with all of us. Everyone, best of luck to you. Definitely be in touch with us in the comments thread. Post those questions and comments for us